my gosh. Maple syrup. Hey, everybody. It's the Maple Syrup Show, and we are live tonight. It is 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time where I am, and I think both of you are all the way across the country on the West Coast. Is that correct?
Yes.
Absolutely. 6 p.m. over here.
Yeah, West Coast is the best coast. I actually wish I was there right now. I think it might be nicer over there than where I am. It's not too bad. It's Canada, so it's cold. But it also, I mean, there's Canada in the West Coast too, where it is not as cold. It's quite nice out there. So we are here.
Yeah, I was like,
today.
Canada's a pretty wide
Very
place.
wide country.
There's a song about how big Canada is.
Canada is ginormous. Comparatively to like most countries, like it just doesn't look that way because Mercator projection is kind of BS as it is, right? As we all know, it doesn't really show the true size of things. But Canada is ginormous with like a very small percentage of people living anywhere else other than right along the border. So most of us live like hugging the states.
Hi, Sarah.
Yeah, so there are people here. Hello, Sarah. How you doing? And we will say hi to everybody as they join the show. But tonight we are here with Eduardo Baraf, who comes to us all the way from sunny California. Edo is the owner-operator of Pencil First Games.
Yeah, owner is fine.
Chief
Founder.
person?
Yeah.
Guy?
Person who makes games. Yeah, that's all.
That's right. And so he is here tonight to tell us all about rules writing. Is that correct, Kat? That's what we're doing tonight? Yeah, rules writing, which is awesome because it's kind of funny. I was just reading a post on Gabe's forum on Board Game Design Lab where somebody said, hey, and they did it anonymously, so it's quite funny. I just sent off my game to a publisher. The publisher asked me for rules. I sent him the sheet that I have. It's like one sheet, but it really doesn't even have the setup on it. Is that a bad thing to do?
Oh my God.
That was the question. It's like, yeah, you did a bad thing. Oh yeah,
well,
give that person a hug
between a rules and just what is the an elevator pitch for your game type of thing.
Oh no. This publisher is asking for the rules.
Oh, I see.
So it's a little bit like, hey, you asked for something, you did not get it, but there you go. Kat, you wanted to talk about what month it is.
Yes. So, as a new arrival to the US, I am not accustomed to, observing, celebrating what is known as Black History Month. And I've done a little bit of looking into it. Of course, I can't speak to it, not being of that descent myself, but I have found it really interesting how recently this has started being recognized. I'm just looking at the Wikipedia article at the moment, and in most cases, in most countries, any kind of recognition of this is younger than me. And sure, I'm 40 something, but that's still way too recent. So one of the things that I think is really important is for us to pay attention to diversity and the history of all of the different types of people who've lived in this country in particular. And I know that you're actually in Canada, Sen, so
yeah, it's the same thing.
Maybe less important to you.
No, it's very important, actually.
I'm kidding. It's America only now.
I mean, US centric thing. I actually didn't know that. Like, I actually just thought Black History Month was worldwide. I didn't realize it was a US centric thing.
It is very much.
It should be worldwide, but like that. I was this years old that I realized that it was only the US that. I just thought it was.
Only looking here, we've got
Cat. Don't be shocked when I tell you about Juneteenth.
Oh no, that's my birthday. So actually, I know all about Juneteenth.
Oh, okay. But do you know that it was like just recently?
Yeah.
Started to be celebrated, like
I was like, oh, a public holiday for my birthday. That's also a really bad thing. But I think that's amazing. Well, the potential for a public. Anyway, yes. But the reason we need to pay more attention to it is this conversation we just had. So I'm going to be making an effort this month to learn some more about Black designers, Black culture, Black creators in general. And that's going to be popping up in our various other conversations. And I would love to hear from people in the comments if there's anyone you think that I should look into, if there are any streamers, YouTubers, all of those sorts of things that you think that I should look into as someone who's new to this. And
in the tabletop community specifically?
specifically,
Yeah.
I think that would be really important because one of the biggest things we can do is raise up those voices.
Right. Yeah, Sarah's saying that growing up in Texas, one of the good things about growing up in Texas was learning about Juneteenth, because that's where it all stems from. It's a very interesting day indeed. So back to Edo, let's talk about you because you're here. Tell us about your origin. Where did you get into gaming and why did you get into gaming and how'd you start?
Sure. So, I mean, I've had the good fortune of being sort of into gaming, engaging with gaming my children too, my whole my whole life. I mean, as a kid, I was big into video gaming. I think at home we played games, but those were sort of more common, Trivial Pursuit or Monopoly or Uno or stuff
Or
like
whatever
that.
that is on your shirt.
Oh yeah, well this was in the video game space, yeah, for sure. Zelda. I was definitely of the Nintendo generation, but so played it games, and then actually I went to the University of Michigan, and I was excited. They had this big magazine about all the clubs, and they only had Dr. Mario Club, where people got together and played Dr. Mario, which I was like, that's weird,
Really?
but we
A
should,
whole club just for that?
a whole
Yeah,
club
I mean
just
it
for that. But
was the University of Michigan.
yeah, and but there wasn't anything else. Like that's what was odd about it. And so actually, at the University of Michigan, I was sort of like, well, we should have a group of folks who like try to like I started an organization called Wolverine Soft, which was like the research, development, and playing of games or something like that. And that was a group where we had a lot of fun playing and making stuff, and as a source of somewhat pride, like it actually still exists at the University of Michigan today, and it has been a long time. But from there, I went into making video games in the game industry. So lots of QA to design to production, making those types of games. And then actually, it was when I was working at a company called Mind Control Software, I started interacting with like some really heavy tabletop gamers. And that's where I met Mark LeBlanc and Andrew Leaker, who both are big in the design and tabletop space, and Thomas Denmark. And it was with Thomas that I actually participated as a co-designer of Murder of Crows, which is like my first tabletop game,
Cool
with
name.
Atlas Games. It's a really fun, super fast little gateway game that still, it still grabs attention here and there. Atlas keeps it
Cool.
at all their shows.
Mhm.
But and so from there, I just continued doing a bunch of video game stuff. And it was actually at another company, Blue Fang Games, where we were making a bunch of online games and mobile games that, when servers go down, they sort of disappear. And at that point, I was sort of like, I really want to make a game that can't disappear. And that's when I started working on Liftoff, Get Me Off This Planet. Did the whole prototype thing, tried to get publishers to take it, got some people who play tested it and thought about it, but it never went anywhere. And then fast forward a couple years later, locally at a gaming group, because I've been since then was big into tabletop gaming. Actually, it was Richard Bliss and Aldo Giozio. That's not how you pronounce his last name. Aldo G. I'm like, I'm not going to pronounce this right. I forget now. And they were like basically, and I met Teal Fristo there, and it was like, hey, like, why don't you put this game on Kickstarter? I think my wife suggested I bring the game Liftoff to the thing. And I was like, and then I got into Kickstarter, did Liftoff. That was Pencil First Game's first game. And, that was in 2020. No, not 2020. That was in 2014. So Pencil First
Mhm.
Games is about coming on 9 years. And since then have had, I don't know, 15 or 16 Kickstarters, started the Gaming with Edo YouTube channel along the way. And yeah, I've been having a blast.
There you go.
That sounds like the perfect situation, really. When you think that you've got a game design, you want to do it your way and you want to get it published, and then it worked. And now you're publishing a bunch more. So
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey for sure. And for me, one of the things that the games have offered, because I'm like a little bit there's not. I'm a little bit more about the journey and a little bit more about, like, for me, board gaming. I mean, I have a job, right? It's a hobby. It's a hobby for me. But what it's become is an outlet to be able to, like, not have, like, like, most of the stuff I work on is like, here's the timeline you have to hit, and here's the amount of money it needs to make, and, like, you know, get it done.
Mhm.
Whereas, like,
Yeah.
on the board game space, it can be a little bit more about making the game you want to make, and doing it at the pace you want to do it, and that helps a whole lot.
That
More
must feel
artsy in
like a
a
bit of a
sense.
luxury
I mean,
to
it
be able
takes a lot
to,
of time.
like, do
Yeah, I
it
mean,
your own
I mean,
way a little bit.
luxury. Yeah, I mean, I mean, it's a luxury. It's a good way of. Let me think of it. I mean, it's a how do I want to phrase it? So, like, certainly there are a lot of folks who start um, board game and board. A lot of the board game creators and Kickstarter folks were initially employed, and they move in. At some point, a lot of them think about, hey, am I going to now quit my job and go do this? And that's a different decision tree for a variety of folks. I've actually, on Gaming with Edo, I've interviewed a lot of people in those categories. For me, living in the Bay Area, like, there just was no tangible way or place where, like, the board gaming, short of, like, some crazy thing, would really become that. And so it allowed it for me to sit in a place where it's, it's a place where I can, you know, be passionate, work with fantastic folks, but, at the same time, I have my family and other responsibilities in my full time job. So, luxury is a weird word, but it is a wonderful complement to what to allow me to both have the rigor and expectations of formal work, but then also an opportunity space to explore and be more creative as time permits.
I meant specifically in terms of, like, being able to choose your timings when you're used to working to someone else's set timings, and, being able to go, "Oh,
Yeah,
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 actually," but you're right, it is also, it's a luxury hobby in a lot of ways to be able to actually spend, a lot of people out there don't have the time or energy to be able to develop their own games and all of those sorts of things, and so for them, it's a dream. So in that sense, yes, that's also a luxury. So
awesome.
which games did you start with? What order did your games come out in? Do you remember?
So yeah, yeah. So, I mean, certainly Liftoff was first, and then I had some smaller titles. I did a game called The Siblings Trouble, which was a card-based storytelling game, and actually we're doing an updated version of that later this year. And then another small game called Gem Packed Cards, which was sort of a cute color puzzle game. And then it was after those two titles, which again funded, but this was small. Like, Liftoff was a pretty big one out of the gate, probably, I don't remember, 40 something, and, like, had a pretty good recognition and awareness in the industry. And then after that, I mean, like, Sibling Trouble was maybe 20, and, like, Gem Pack, like, funded, like, at level was like 10 or $12,000. It was like a pretty squeaker. Um, but then after that, I started partnering and expanding into sort of the nature line that Pencilverse Games has since been more known for. So I'm looking over here because, like, I have a stack, so it's helping me remember. But so that was really when Herbaceous sort of came around, and Herbaceous um, and Heroes and Tricks was in the same year. And then from Herbaceous, which I did with Steve Finn and Beth Sobel, which was fantastic, and Ben Schulman did the graphic design. Then that sort of expanded and became the Pencilverse Games nature line. So there's, like, Herbaceous, Foliferous, the Whatnot Cabinet, Sunset Over Water, like, those types of really easy to play, welcoming gateway games. And then also, sort of in that adventure side, I have a game called Folk Hollow, which I partnered with Keith Mateka from Thunderworks Games, and that, with, like, legendary creatures, sort of has this other side of our business. So we have, like, this nature centric games, and, like, we call our nature line and our adventure line. And so it's been really great seeing it grow out, and really, you know we were not cutting edge isn't the right words, but, like, Pencilverse Games settled into, like, a certain type of nature fun and a welcoming product that has since become very popular and expanded in
Yes.
the marketplace. I
Mm.
don't think we were the first, but I think we settled into it, and it's really
At the
since
start of it,
been
though.
Yeah, and
been
I
an
Yeah.
definitely think
a growth space.
yeah, that you brought a lot of eyes to it with,
Mm.
Art by Beth and stuff like that. Her art is just ridiculous, so
Oh, it's fantastic for
ridiculously
sure.
good. Um, and, I think that was, sort of the marriage of the game plus the art and the feel and the aesthetic. At the same time that games like, Parks came out and
Mm.
Trekking, all those games. So it's really nice to see that there's, interest in the natural world and that people are becoming more conscious of it and people are thinking about, okay, what's the, end life of this game and how do we change production? So I think that whole movement is very, very cool to me. So I enjoyed seeing it and I like seeing Beth's work on good games too. So there you go. Good stuff. Today we are actually here to talk with Edo about rules writing
Yes.
because we've been told by a certain somebody that you are dang good at writing rules. So let's get the questions started. If you have any questions out there, we see Jim, we see George and Sarah out there in the chat. If you have any questions out there in Maple Syrup Land for Edo about specifically writing rules or anything about his channel, Gaming with Edo, or Pencil First Games, please put them in the chat. We'll get them to him. Okay. So go ahead, Kat. Lay it on him.
So actually Herbaceous is one of my favorite games.
Oh,
So
fantastic.
it's pretty exciting to, be able to talk to you about it. Um, it's it's certainly one of the games that I recommend to people who are trying to get into gaming and want to see what a sort of a lightweight modern game feels like. And one of the reasons that I recommend it is it's beautiful and it's easy to learn. So tell me, what is it about your rules, the way that you approach rule writing, that makes your rule book so approachable? Do you
Uh,
know? Do
well,
you
so
know?
yeah, well, I mean, thank you for the kind words, and certainly it's been wonderful to see Herbaceous being a product that has been very welcoming. I think, um, I mean, I think I'd break it down into a couple pieces. Like, certainly, oh, hello. Um, certainly, a game being easy to learn and approachable starts at the game design, right? Like, so to some degree, just having something that is streamlined and approachable and turn order is a natural progression and iconography. A lot of those things um, contribute hugely to how easy it is to pick up and learn a game. Um, but when it comes to the sort of rules writing part, um, I think there's a lot of different approaches out there and different thoughts on like different rule books and ways. Like I have had a really nice conversation with um, Rodney Smith from a Watch It Played, who like has to teach games all the time,
Mm.
right? And that's like a whole different sort of complementary skill to writing the rules. But I think what I would start with, in many ways, for somebody who's coming in and thinking about how to write rules, is I'm like a huge proponent of go find rules that you like or that are really good and easy to use that like are similar complexity and weight to your game, right? Like we all play lots of games. Most folks who are making games play a lot of games and probably have a sense for things that have been really easy to work with and learn. And we all learn and think differently. So it might be that what you think is an easy rule is actually like super complicated to other people. But my guess is everyone's experienced like, oh, this rule book was great. It really did it. And if you could identify a rule book that's great for a game that sort of matches your weight, that goes a long way. So, like for example, and I can speak to Herbaceous, but Liftoff, Get Me Off This Planet, the first one where I really had to do the whole rule book by myself. Atlas Games, they like sort of took that over and we just gave them the rules. But like Liftoff, every part of that product I did. At the time, I played a lot of Small World. I played a lot of Ticket to Ride. I played a lot of those type of gateway games, and a lot of the similarities in weight to Liftoff was that. And so for me, it was sort of like, well, I can teach those games really. Let me look at their rule book. So that's like, oh, okay. Well, they talk with it. They have a little thematic introduction, and then they give me an overview, and then they do setup, and they like walk through these steps. And I think the simple step of having a reference and then using it as a guide, and like I'm not talking about plagiarizing, right? Like I'm
No.
talking about looking at like a structure and saying, oh, that makes sense to me, and that is like how I can convey ideas, and then writing your own version of it um, is just like it's an amazing jumping off point for folks who've never written like a lot of times, especially in the Kickstarter space, creators, are good at something and haven't done any of the other things. So maybe they're an artist or maybe they're the designer but like, they probably haven't been making the full cycle of games. And so having that reference points goes a long way. And then, like, I guess it's two things. It's having a reference point, but then also understanding your game and understanding how to play your game and teach your game. I certainly also would recommend before, and this is like, I don't know how thorough you want this answer to be, but before getting into like writing the rule book, teach the game.
That's what I was
like
gonna ask. Yeah.
yeah. I think it's easy to like. I mean, it never hurts like you're prototyping or whatever. You want to write down the rules and understand what happens. But I think playing the games with people, teaching people, gives you an idea of how you think about things, present things, and that doesn't always line up with a rule book. Like a rule book, like needs to give a little bit more of a table, like give a little bit more awareness, and like it's never going to be the same as how you do it. But I think getting familiar with the types of questions, I mean, that'll just help you make a better game. Really layers in. But like once you've sort of your game, you've played it, you have a good idea of how it works, then you have a reference point. I think you just try to shove it in and layer it together. There are definitely like another thing that I think helps early designers is I think early designers get caught up with graphic design and they get caught up with trying to lay things out. And like I can't say this enough, and I honestly I don't see it enough. Just take pictures of your game, of your prototype, right? Like, hey, you want to set up? Like, just set up the game and just take a photo of it. This is what a turn is. Just take a photo of it. There's so much in rule books. I mean, even Kickstarter thing, because I do a lot of game with editor. I do previews. I read lots of this isn't ready for prime time rule books, like either from prototyping or from Kickstarter creators who just don't have the skill set yet. And it's like, stop trying to have me imagine what this looks like. Like just take a photo and then I'll know it. And
It's
you can always
remarkably
turn that
easy.
into,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
It's so
remarkably easy to
obvious
take a
when you say it.
screenshot. Yeah.
Yeah.
In
yeah.
Tabletop
And then
Simulator, you can
hand it
just
to your
right there.
you can do it and hand it to your graphic designer like later, because they're going to be like, I don't know what you mean. I don't know what that looks
Yeah.
like. What do you mean? And so, and then if you want, you can chuck a little arrow. But like again, for people who aren't comfortable, cut an arrow out on paper and put it on the thing you're going to take a photo of, and you've just done graphic design, right? Like, and so
Yeah.
it's really easy, and I think it's just something that gets missed. So that's again another way for you to sequence it. Also, again, if you're play testing, you can take photos of the different things that people are doing in that way. So that's always helpful. And I think it's an easy win that people don't do enough. And so I think that's important. I do think it's important also to think about the structure of what you're trying to convey. So, typically you'll want to, awesome. Thank you. Typically you're going to want to go to, like lay out, give a sense of like, here are the components, and then, game overview, that this is the structure, and then how do you, what's the setup, and then rolling the players through the game. Some people like, it's interesting. Not all pencil first game rules are the same. So like, and this is a little like inside ball, but like lift off, gem pack cards, siblings trouble, and then all of the nature line. That's really more me. And legendary creatures. The Skull Hollow games were written by another rulebook writer that helped out a lot. But the format, the style is it's a little bit of a different style. Tori was also me, and then Heroes Welcome's also a different style. And those are like, I can talk about how he ended up at those points. But if you look at the nature line as an example, which I think is probably what Sarah's referring to, is my guess. That's a format that I've honed in, and just for what it's worth. So as far as process is concerned, sometimes I'm the designer. Other times on a lot of the nature games, most of them, Steve Finn's the designer. He writes it all up in a Word doc, and like he has his format, and he just goes through it, and it's pretty like cut and dry. But he knows how to write. He knows how to convey information very, very well. I then, from a process perspective, I have a Google Doc that like I've had one for every game. And what I'll usually do is like when I'm working on the foliferous one, I'll just open up, make a duplicate of the herbaceous one. And then I basically go through my sections and I chuck from his doc, his writing into each section where it would go. And then I do this like translation thing where I go through and I sort of think about it and give a header, and he uses some languages different than me, and I mess around with it. And then, once it's Google Doc, it's super useful. And then I can have him come back through and be like, hey, I just translated you into another language. It's like your
Also
language, but it's
English.
a little different. Also English, but a different version of it. And then what do you think? Then a new step that has been fantastic is Jessica Walker, who has been working with Pencil First Games for a number of years now, on a lot of sales and marketing and other things. Is also just a fabulous editor and writer, and really good at finding and being consistent with the language. And so I'll pass that. She'll do, and actually with her doing it, I've gotten better at doing it before she has to do it. We'll be going through and like looking at sentence structure and talk whether you're using you or like what like is it passive voice or active voice, and also like she's now gotten to the point where she's worked on enough of our games where it's actually even something like when we do see page XX, we do it with brackets and this. We don't do it that way anymore. Like and so she has a really awesome lexicon, like Pencil First Game lexicon, and like how that's all been together. And so that's been really helpful to level up the process. And for sure, whatever stage you have a rule book, the best way to test the rule book is hand it to somebody and like sit back and watch and wait for the questions and watch for that. That's like another huge bit to it.
So to kind of summarize what you've said so far, the first thing that you should really do when you're looking to make a rule book is to look at lots of other rule books. The second thing you should do is teach your game and pay attention to how you teach your game, or those could be interchangeable depending on what order you want to do them in.
Sure.
Once you've started writing rules, a good thing to do is to have some sort of a template that you follow so that you have a consistency within a line if you have a line of games or within a brand, and that it's also really good in general to look for consistency. So consistency of terminology, language, tone, usage, things like that. Are you saying that there's that sort of a roundabout what you're saying?
I think that last bit is like further down. I mean, I've sort of been going all over the place, but like if you're at the point where you're just focused on like tone and usage and like that consistency, if all the other things are right, like you actually that you're getting into like audience nitpicker land where they're going to like give you a hard time about it. But like if it's clear and in one it's passive and the other it's active, like it's not that big of a deal. Somebody might mention it. I think there's also like one of the things you get familiar with, and when you're on a template or being consistent, it's like really easy, but like super common, like what are my pet peeves with people who write rules? Like one is like using header font in body. That you see all the time with new people who are not used to writing rule books. They have a fancy schmancy font that like it looks really good when you're like the overview, and then they'll use it
in the body text.
And you're like,
for every section.
This is
Guess what? You know what?
It's so
in
hard
print,
to read.
White text over black is not that easy, and like there you can have highlights, but if you're doing like the entire rule book that way, it can be very difficult to read. So like there are some
Gothic.
like print well, there are just some like print legibility graphic design basics that also are helpful, but again, typically not things you'll see in like these are just things you'll see for people who are like doing a rule book. Like a lot of the game crafter games, for folks who have just like picked that up and dove in, tend to have that problem. There was some question. How do you balance the giving? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, George is asking, how do you balance giving the rules document character, but still keep the content clear and direct?
That's a great question, and there are. I would say a lot of it comes down to like how good you are. like if you were to look at Trogdor, the game,
Hmm.
I don't remember who published it, but like that game is oozing with personality, and the rules are oozing with personality, but also were very well done rules. I think people run into problems when they throw personality in when they don't have like. So I guess my answer would be write it clear and direct first. Like get
Yeah.
a really clean, clear rule book, and then decide where and how you want to add that personality. There's lots of ways to do it. I think from a Pencil First Games perspective, we tend to, sorry about the
It's
dog.
okay.
We tend to have a little bit of an opening overview, personality, thematic entrance for the game. But the other thing that we try to do, which is when I sort of backed to like um, making the game easy to learn, is language can be intuitive and structure can be intuitive. So like I'm trying to think of a good example, but if we're talking about a game with gardening that has stages that follow the normal stages of plants, like plant, pot, grow, harvest, those words, when those words are used in the context that people understand them in real life, they become superpowered words that teach in ways that help the process.
Hmm.
A lot of
Mm.
times people use words that don't match the theme or match the natural progression of those words, which creates confusion and disengagement. And so like I'm sort of off point, but like character, like intuitive, natural word structure of character, or even intuitive in like, hey, people know what a discard pile is. People know what these terms
Mm.
are. Like these are common terms. That type of character helps a ton. When you're talking about like, no, I want to like have it be funny or other things, I think there's really nice ways to do that. Lots of great examples. I'm a big fan of italicized. Clearly, the rules are clear, and then that's personalities there. The shot of the person coming in from the side with a little bubble that has a little fun in it is another good way to do it. Writing a rule book from the entire voice of your main character, your world. We do some. Heroes Welcome had some of this. I don't remember how thorough it was, or we broke it into sections, but there's certainly, at least in the like a little bit about goals and objective, it's from the Goblin's voice. You just have to be so good. You just have to be a really good writer to do it in a way that's clear. I think a good way to do it that still delivers what you're hoping for is set up interjection in places, but when it's the
Mm.
rules, just,
It's the
you know,
rules. Yeah.
it's the
Sort of
rules.
like flavor text, right? You
Yeah.
you can add
Yeah.
it on for
Yeah, yeah.
decoration, but
You
not
can you can you
distraction.
can read it or not. I
Yeah.
think like CGE does this really well for a lot of Lada's games. They're really nice. Um, Helena is watching right now, and Josh, her husband, is great at this. He takes my robotic writing because I write like a technical writer, very robotic, and scientific and stuff like that. And he just turns it into normal everyday human speech, and it's awesome. And I just have to pay him. It's great. It's really really good.
I mean,
Yeah.
Ooh, controversial. George
actually, hold
wants
on.
to. Oh, yeah, yep.
Well, one quick second to respond. This is an important thing you just said, which is there are some really good rule writers. You can
You should pay them.
hire them and pay
Mm.
them, and
Mm.
not trying to, not too expensive, because typically you're talking about 4, 8, 12 page. I mean, depends on the rule book, I guess, but like for the amount of like for the effort to go from not good to like reasonable, like that jump is like probably it's a worthwhile investment.
It is.
And
It is.
compare and the impact of players, it's like important to remember that your rule book is like your guide, instruction manual, onboarding for your play. It's your
Yeah.
funnel, it's your tutorial. Without
Yeah,
Mm.
it, who cares what
totally.
your game is, because they're
Mm.
not playing it
They
right.
can't play it. Yeah.
um
It's also the
yeah,
number one barrier to entry, right?
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
100%. So that's
We've
where,
just
it's like, hey, you can hire somebody to help. That's another totally
and
reasonable approach.
please do. We've just George and I have just been trying to play through some of our games, and we have struggled with some of the rule books because they're just the structure doesn't make sense, or they're not consistent, or they've just skipped something assuming that you know this kind of game, and so they don't bother explaining it properly, and you get 2/3 of the way through and you go, oh, that's what that meant, damn it.
Right.
And if
I've already made all these
it was
decisions.
a 3-hour game,
Yeah, yeah,
we're
yeah.
like, oh.
A very common offender to that are trick-taking game rulebooks. And
Yeah.
I'd have to go back to Heroes and Tricks because I've probably made the mistake, but there's just a certain amount of like, oh, we would just already assume you know how to play hearts. And it's
Or
like,
that you know
I
what a
don't know how to
trick
play.
is.
Oh, you know what a trick is? Like, that's not a normal word. Is everyone aware that's not a normal word?
It's not a normal
But
word.
yeah, that comes up a lot.
George asks another question. He asks, "Do you feel there's a place for passive voice in real rule books?"
Um, sure. Like, I think a lot of people have more like there are definitely folks who have strong opinions about whether or not you have you or yours and how you are you addressing the player or are you just giving the rules. um it doesn't bug me. I think if the rules are clear and you're consistent with it, I think but there are people who would just be like, you have to change this, is unacceptable. Like, there's some people who feel really strongly. I'm not one of them. um so yeah,
I'm
I think
more
it's
on
fine.
team active voice, to be honest.
Yeah,
But
absolutely. Active voice. If there's too much requiring to be done happening in the background, it ends up sounding very sort of, oh, this has been done to that and blah blah. No, no, can we just do it?
it was
Just
very interesting.
it
I
also
went through
reduces the wordiness.
Yeah, well, I was just gonna say, I went through an entire, like, I can't remember how many pages of an RPG that I wrote, and I took out everything of will. This player will do this, and just taking out will, and it took out, like, thousands of words, just thousands of words, right? That were
Yeah.
all will, W-I-L-L, because that's very
No,
passive voice.
yeah, I think there's a lot of wins there, and uh, but I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting discussion. I just at some point it's your game. You just have like another part of it too is like how much. An interesting debate is like how much should the rule book teach the rules versus get you excited to play, and
Mm.
like
That's an interesting question. I like that question.
Mm.
in a video game your like, especially in mobile games, right? Your
Yeah,
tutorial, your onboarding is like critical, and it has to do both. I
right.
need to keep your attention. I need you. You can't swipe up. I got to keep you not swiping up. But when you get through it, I need you to know how to play. And so
Yeah.
it's very when you buy a box game, there's a lot more commitment from the player. Maybe not in a con or something, but I spent $20, $40, $60 on this thing. I have it in my house. There's not seven other like I'm not gonna swipe up on it. Like I'm gonna like look at your rules and read it. But I do think there's a delicate balance between teaching the rules and again just trying to sell how cool the game is. Like a lot of games sort of run that risk of like oversell in their
Mm.
rules.
Yeah.
And I think you it's just an interesting balance. But like I would start without it and then focus on clarity. Just focus on when somebody gets to the other side of this, they know how to play, and then and then you can embellish upon it. But I really would stress, and we had to rewrite the delicious rules sort of late in the game when we recognized that sometimes it's the rule book, but sometimes it's like, you know what, the terms we're using for these regions aren't clear enough and distinct enough, or the
Mhm.
words we're using it for, or the UI doesn't make a clear enough distinction. So a lot of it oftentimes, I guess what I'd focus on is like, it's not the game's done and then the rule book's done. It's usually more like you're writing the rule book, and in writing the rule book, you're referring to things and you're coming up with terms, and it should be part of your process of finalizing your game, and you should be willing to go back and say, okay, well, actually, I tried writing like like another thing that comes up a lot is like if you've tried 7 times to explain a rule and you like it's got 100 corner cases and you can't do it, it actually might mean that the rule's bad. Like
Mm.
cut it from the game.
Just
Like
get rid of it.
what is it?
Yeah.
Right? What is it doing for you? And like, is there a different design that doesn't require a paragraph to explain?
Yeah.
Oh, when you discard a card, instead of discarding a card, you put it up here and you move it here, and then you move it over here, and then and it's like, but at the end of the day, like, does that matter? Like,
Yeah.
what gain is it? And
It's
if it's
such
not
an
that
obvious
much,
symptom, right? Like when you're
yeah,
sitting there and you're like, I can't figure out how to explain this. Well, why is it there?
Right. Yeah.
If it's
Sarah
that
Ship
hard to
is,
explain, should it be there?
yeah. Sarah Ship's
Mm.
saying there's also a balance between teaching rules and repeat reference guide. And Rebecca is saying, yes, Sarah, I'm always sad when there isn't a quick reference guide. A couple other comments. Troy Cabin was saying that, I apologize if it's Caban, is saying that the Unfair Manual was a masterclass in a lot of the stuff that you were talking about originally, Edo. And that's, Joel and Kate Finch. Obviously the Finch family is good at that kind of stuff. And then yeah, there's a lot of stuff who a lot of stuff that I think we as designers get really close to our games and our rules, and we think people understand, but they don't. And Troy is saying that an outside person is so new to your game, and because designers are so close to the games, they forget that some shorthand develops in the iteration process that the players just don't have access to, right? And unless you give it to them in the rules, they're not going to know what
Or
you
you
mean by
forget.
the thingamajig or the
yeah. So
That's the worst when you've
whatever.
forgotten.
I think that's actually calls out a good skill to build, and actually, like, I sort of developed it really early, probably working in QA, um, 20 years, what, 5, a long time ago, um, is like being able, and it's something you can get good at. It's not like you're just a certain type of person, I believe. Being able to like sort of clear your mind and approach something like with it's not 100% fresh eyes, but as like from a player's perspective is hyper powerful. Like being able to be like, I'm going to set aside everything I know and I'm just going to read the words. I also highly recommend reading words out loud sometimes
Mm.
too, for both better writing, but also just like what, um, and slow down to like, I'm just new to this. You'd be amazed at that. It is a really good way to like getting total stranger is also a version of that. But like, I do think you can get good at saying, oh, like the next step says this, but I haven't read anything about that. I mean, the amount of times a rule book references something that hasn't happened, you haven't learned yet is like pretty common.
Yep.
Like, oh, that goes in the this pile. It's like, I don't
What
know
is the
where
this
Yeah, what
pile?
even
what
is
is
that?
that? What
Yeah.
is that? So that's like another place.
That takes
Yeah.
me to another question I had was, how do you feel about glossaries? And do you think if there is a glossary in the game, it should be at the start or at the end of the rules?
That was a funny one that came up with Rodney Smith, and he had some reference to like some game where it had like a 50-page glossary or something. I
Okay, not 50 pages, but just
no,
explain
but
the terms.
but like I don't. Uh, I think that even though we talked a little bit about like how engaging and how much should the rule book like entice you to play, I do think as a reader, if you're not grabbing me and driving me through a narrative and I don't mean narrative thematically, but like a reader's journey, and you just slam me with info, I'm not gonna. It doesn't matter that it's there. I'm not real. I'm just gonna like be like, I don't know what any of this. Like there's only a certain type. There's like a certain type of person brain set who's like, I want give me all the terms, and then I can keep all these terms that don't have any context in my head, and then read through a thing and use those terms. That is like a minority of people. Most people have to have it in the context as they go.
And then go
So
look it up.
yeah, I would definitely not suggest. I would certainly suggest, hey, you're about to talk about something in a section, have a little table contents or a little diagram to how they relate to each other. I think providing a visual framework for upcoming information is amazingly powerful. But that's very different to me than a text glossary. I think that should go at the end if you're going to do it. I think glossaries are fine. I have no problem with FAQs. I mean, if you're writing an FAQ and you haven't shipped the game yet, like maybe you can see if you can answer it in context. But I don't mind those types of resources. I do think they get separate. I'm certainly a fan of having references, whether it's on the back of the rules or separate cards. I think that all helps, except when you have a game where you're like, we're going to do iconography salad and not provide any clarity and expect you to be able to parse this new this new language of shapes and symbols, and you have a a reference card with 70 different things, and
On
that's
one
how we
card.
solve this problem. Yeah, so I one thing that's important, and it impacts localization, and there's business perspectives on it, but like sometimes words are better. Sometimes icons are great. Sometimes it's a combination, but sometimes it's like just write it and let them understand it. And it depends on your game. But
Yeah, I
anyway,
think it definitely depends on the game and like the actual like well, like the UI UX of it all and like the layout and how you're holding those things or not holding those things, whether they're laid out on the table and how
yeah.
far away they are from you. There's all sorts of other aspects. I will interject and say that psychologically, like if you read stuff before and you know what they are before, so I'm not talking like a 50-page glossary, but if you have a few key terms before, it actually makes your reading comprehension increase.
Mm.
Um, over time, like
But
if you have
well,
it just right before, but small amounts, not tons.
well, what I would say is I don't. I'm sure you're right. Um, but I would still put
I'd
those
sidebar
words
it.
or sidebars are cool, but
Or
also if you put those
context.
words into a sentence that
Mm.
uses those words in a way
Sure,
that's
yes,
explaining
yeah.
an overview,
Yeah,
to me that, hey, in this game you're going to have these and these, and they fit together in this ways. Well, let's learn more
yeah,
below.
yeah.
Um, but yeah,
Or flip to the glossary for detail or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I just
Depending
think
on the
they need
size
to
of
be
the game.
somewhere, right? Yeah, and that's the other thing, right? It's like how many are there? Is there a good way to break them down?
Mm.
But yeah, if you don't have background knowledge while you're reading, your fluency of and uptake and comprehension decrease very quickly. But
but
anyway,
even on that
yeah,
sorry, just on that
you know,
glossary one, I would be I would hesitate to be what I would avoid is I should not need to use your glossary. If
right,
like the version where you're like, oh, there's this thing, and then I have to go look it up, like there glossary references, appendixes for supporting information for like we explained how to use one card. Here's the other 20 if you want to like know how to
right.
like I think that
That makes
works.
sense.
But like I don't want to be like I don't want to be learning and then have to like switch back and forth to like continue moving.
Right.
That's a very, very difficult process.
Yeah, and I don't think that's a good process. And it kind of goes back to what you were saying before. It's like choose the right words to mean the right
Yeah.
things, right?
Intuitive
And don't
terminology.
and don't don't necessarily change words just to have a thematic word when
Yeah.
there's maybe a better, more readily understood word that you could use. I think that's also very important. Um,
Like, to use your gardening example, the discard pile, referring to it as the compost heap, can work, right? Because people can figure that out, especially if it's going to be reused. But if you decide to call it like something completely different, like, I don't know, I can't think of anything unthematic about gardening games, but
Yeah, no, but for sure. And sometimes, I mean, look, I consider board games and games art. I really do, and I think there's a creative aspect of it. And so sometimes art, you want art to win. Like sometimes you want to say, you know what, part of this game is all about its character, and that character is going to be in the rule book. I don't care.
right,
And that's not that's like I fully believe in authenticity of vision and the idea that creatively you might want to do something somehow. um you just have to balance it, and like if you're going to do something, know when you're making it, you're you're taking a comprehension or intuitive gap for a creative win, and
mm,
maybe that'll work, but like just having some thought around it and understanding of it, I think goes a long way.
yeah,
it's also about
uh,
making people feel smart, right?
yeah,
You don't
clever,
want to make people feel stupid and have to
never,
look everything up because then it becomes a really challenging game.
right. Amy says that she reads out all the stuff, rules, Kickstarter copy, email updates, almost everything that she writes. And maybe that's why she's the Barnes and Noble Game of the Month this year.
Yeah, shout out
Congratulations.
Amy.
Good job.
Oh,
Rebecca
which
Strang.
game? Which game? Hold
Oh,
on. Which
sorry.
game?
Well, you think you know me.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Rebecca Strang, who's a librarian, loves rule books that have graphic content so she can visually identify pieces and parts and things. And she says that she has to teach games at the library a lot and often to people who don't often play board games. So visuals and player aids are a huge help. That the glossary of key terms makes people feel like they can find the answers themselves versus needing to ask her for help. And so that's important to her as somebody who teaches to the public like on a daily basis.
And
Um,
accessibility, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And also that not everybody is familiar with your a typical rule book layout, and that's okay too. But that I think a good format will help people, you know, if we can adopt not a universal format, I mean, God forbid, but a format that's kind of useful for everybody, that might be beneficial. So there you go. So yeah, lots of people thinking about rules. I think rules are, like we said, the interface between your game and the person playing it. So they're very, very important. If anybody has more questions or comments, please do put them in the chat. We'll get them to Edo.
I think we
One
have
thing I was
one
going to
more
mention as a
pre-recorded question.
Oh, we do. Yeah.
Yeah.
oh,
But sorry, go on.
well, I was just going to say like, another interesting rule. Oh, hey, buddy.
Goodness.
Another interesting rule. Something's happening outside. Conversation is like, should rules teach be comprehensive? That's like a very modern gamer rule book approach. Not gamer is not the right way of saying it, but like, this is Eli. He is hello.
Huh.
Where like I think a lot of times if you look at a number of European rule books, but also like much more like mass market rule books, they are not corner case ruling. They are not exhaustively catching all those things. They're
Right.
basically like, yeah, here you can play, start playing. But what about there's a very a cycle in board gamings around the rigor and completeness of rules, and I think it's actually to some degree also an audience aspect of it,
Yeah. Yeah. I
and
think so.
and I think it's an audience that I think a lot of creators and Kickstarter creators, but like here and board game makers hear a lot. But there is something to be said about like I was playing Century Spice Road or something like oh, the rule books are like literally it's a sheet with a front and a back.
Yeah,
Like
that was the goal, actually.
oh my goodness, it doesn't answer all the questions. And they were like, I wasn't in the room, but like I have to assume somebody was like, yeah, all right, that's fine. People are going to start playing, and if this person plays a little different than that, or that's a house rule, or they have to look that up online, or they ask that question, that's okay because we're going to get everyone started. And it isn't my perspective. It is not the rule book trend, and I find myself falling into that, and I've turned into, boy, if I don't answer this, if I don't say this the right way, I'm going to get that question. And like, well, what about this and this and this? And when it's on this triple case, and you it ends up creating more. And I even think our nature line has it. Like the amount of like, I better say this wording correctly to really make sure that the person who's going to play this way doesn't play that way. I do think it's at the expense of comprehension and more casual players. So I do think it's something
Yeah,
that
definitely at the expense of approachability for sure.
yeah, I don't know, and I don't know the answer there, but I definitely see that as like the more people I just feel like the more I've seen creators and go from game 1 to game 2 to game 3 to game 4, the thoroughness of rule books goes up. But like I'm not convinced it's always the best thing, and I don't know the answer to that, but it's
Yeah,
interesting to me.
it's interesting because Isaac Shalev, who will be a guest next week, when we were talking about orthogonal versus diagonal on forum the other
You're
day,
never letting that
I
go.
am never letting that go. That'll just just like consume next week's conversation. But like he was very much like, yeah, people play the game wrong, so what? And I'm like, yeah, I made this game to be played a very specific way. So I think it depends somewhat how you look at games and how you think about your games that maybe dictate how you write your rules, right? Like, is this a finely tuned engine that if it breaks, it is everybody's gonna have a bad experience? Or is it a game that is kind of more like a toolkit and you can do whatever you want with it? Like role playing games, I still write very specific rules, but I know people are going to break them because that's the nature of role playing games. Whereas I see board games as very much more of like this is a curated experience in a box. And maybe that's my fault for viewing them that way because that is how I view them. And I have a very specific experience I would like you to have when you play the game. If you change that, that's on you, but at least my rules should be clear enough that you are playing it the way I intended you to play it. That's how I feel.
I find that perspective super interesting. Would
Right?
you say
Weird,
that
eh?
was would you say that's true about movies? Like do you think movies, because those are even more literal, right? Like
Yeah, yeah,
there's
yeah.
no
Most of them
and
anyways, right?
but like you could have is it about the story that the director or creator is trying to tell, or is it about the person who's viewing it and how they interpret it?
That is a good question, right? It's like
Mm.
what is the authorial intent, and is there an authorial intent in any of this? Um, and I would say both are valid. Both the impression that is left upon the viewer because of their lived experience mingled with the experience that is provided by the movie. And I guess the same thing, with games can happen. Uh, but also, I think my major point is that when people don't follow the rules and they say, "Oh, this game sucked." And
Yeah.
it's like, "Wait, but you played the game wrong. How can you say it sucked?" Or they
Yeah.
house rule the game, like, within a second of looking at the rules saying, "That won't work," and they never even tried it. It's so strange to me, that's all. I guess I'm just a rules follower. I'm sorry.
No, okay. So, but like, it's there's a different. Here's a different example,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
I'm not. I get it, and you know, I'm reading the comments as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But let's take a video game for a second.
Sure.
Oftentimes in a lot of video games, and what's your physical throwing game? I forget the name of it. Junkyard, right?
Yeah,
Am I
Junkyard.
crazy? But wait, you take a video game where players engage with it in a totally different way that was intended. Like I'm pretty sure Zelda speedruns was not how
Right.
Miyamoto and was any interested, or any of these places where somebody has found your product, engage. I understand that, like, don't come complaining to me if you played it wrong, even though you're exactly the person they should complain to. But but on the other hand, when people find something and they
Yeah.
engage with it in a way that's independent from the intent, the I mean, I think that's actually a wonderful thing and a beautiful
Yeah,
thing.
I
And I
mean,
think
as long as they're having
Mm.
fun, I'm okay with that. It's when they're not having fun.
right,
Well,
Or
you would
right,
have fun if you
exactly,
played it
right.
the right way.
or when
But yeah, no, but
they don't start with, like, I have no problem with, for example, people looking at a recipe for a meal and then going, "Oh, okay, I've made this general kind of thing before. I think I'm going to alter this one, even though it's the first time I'm making it, because I have a lot of experience with this type of recipe." But if they go, "I've never made this before, and I think this thing is wrong," and then they decide to make it their own way, then they're like, "Well, the house is on fire, and what I had to eat tasted like, you know,
Okay, but hold on. I'm gonna play
so."
devil's advocate for a second. I want to play devil's advocate because, like, I think, and I sort of want to use the word luxurious because I don't think we think of it the same way.
we
But
don't.
but
Okay.
is it really like perhaps in that example, the recipe example, that like, are you really taking into account what situation that person might be when they're engaging the recipe? Or they like it feels like people play games and engage things in lots of different dynamics, situations, and settings, and they come from different backgrounds
Mm.
and their life, like, and what like it might be easy for somebody who plays board games, has deep experience reading rules, quiet space to set it up and play without the five kids running around. Like there's all those sort
Sure.
of different environments that people
Mm.
consume this media, and I think it might be overstepping to like not expect that environment to, or their reality to impact how they might experience something. Like, oh, why didn't you follow the rules? Because I had a kid screaming at me the whole time I tried. So I think it's like an
I mean,
interesting. I think it's hard to.
d just
I think it creates space and opportunity to allow the environment to be one where you're like, they might not follow it. So is the game supporting that? Like, if my rules are so rigid that if they don't do it, they don't read it crystal clear the first time, because maybe that's a challenge for them and they're not going to have fun. There might be an opportunity to create an experience that's a little bit more flexible.
so I have ADHD and I never play the game right the first time. That is my standard experience. But basically every single time I try and play a board game, I get it wrong the first time.
Right.
I have learned to not blame the game, but I definitely initially was like, "This is too hard. These rules are too complicated. I can't. This is a shit game." It's not necessarily the game's fault. it's not necessarily my fault. It's not necessarily the barking dog next door or whatever. That being said, if I don't stop and go, is there something about these rules? Like, for example, Cat in the Box. Oh my God. Cannot figure out how to play that game. That is the perfect example of a trick taking game that assumes you know how to play trick taking games and skips whole important sections. Anyway, but I think that if I then choose to say that's a terrible game because I have not played it correctly, and that's what Sen's talking about, I have chosen for whatever reason, or I have not for whatever reason, experienced the curated experience he was trying to give to me. I can't make a judgment on that game. Once I've played it correctly, and then if I decide I'm going to house rule it, that's cool. That's my choice.
So I okay. I appreciate and recognize your perspective, and I think that a lot of folks. I'm representing a less common perspective here in this conversation, but like that's not your challenges with ADHD, but this thing about playing the rules correct and not being judgy about it. Like there are people, there are game designers who I deal with and have spoken with who are like, don't rate my game unless you've played it 10 times. I think a reviewer, here's a reviewer could not possibly rate my game if they haven't played it 10 times. And if
Okay,
they're
no,
only playing it once with
too
their friend,
much.
no, but this is a real perspective.
I know.
If they've
Yeah.
only played it one time, they have no right to be reviewing the game. You should get to the table, play it multiple times. It's a game and it's like, that's just a more extreme example of saying, like, if you don't consume down this deeper path, then you can't judge. And it's like, well, I'm going to judge from wherever and however I experience it. And in the ADHD case, my kid has ADHD. If they can't grasp or engage with it, he'll have challenges with certain things and certain styles, and he doesn't like it. I mean, it would help to preface, like, based on my learning style, I don't like this type of game or your rule. Like you could couch it a little bit, but I think there's an opportunity for game creators to switch the viewpoint of what they created, and I said I'm not trying to what they created and how they want it consumed, and also just reflect on somebody might be consuming it in a different way and in a different style, and that maybe if you can understand and appreciate those different consumption types, you can then maybe adjust your persona.
It's basically a don't at me, bro. If you like, don't at me if you're playing it a different way. I mean, great, do it. If you're having fun, totally fine. Just don't at me about it because I don't know the answer anymore. I literally do not know because you're not playing the game I made.
You're not
I think
playing my game. That's a point.
usually the problem because people will ask me, well, what do I do in this situation? Well, you changed 3 other rules. I don't know. I literally could not tell you. I also forget all the rules for my games once I write them. So there's also that.
I have to agree. It is challenging once you've done a lot
It's
of
super
products
challenging
for somebody. I mean, most of the time, and it's a time consuming thing that, I don't know what the right answer is. A lot of creators have stopped doing it, but somebody asks you a question, you're like, okay, I guess I'll go back to the rules. I'm going to open the rule book for you from a game from 5 years ago and be like, oh yeah, on page 3, right here, that's the answer to your question. I mean, sometimes you're like, oh yeah, you're right. I don't know where that answer is.
Well, I mean, so honestly, a lot of that is why I have publishers and I don't self-publish because I don't want to do that. I literally don't have the time or the inclination to. I do that for my students all day long. I don't have the inclination to do that for people who are consuming games. So it's not that I have no respect for them or that I don't like them. It's just that's not how I want to spend my time. So
it's a lot of
I
emotional heavy lifting as well.
It can be because
you're
there's
kind
a lot
of
of people
relitigating
or they're very
decisions you've already
angry. They're
made, or
very angry about
exactly.
something. It's like, well, if you didn't change the rules or if you just did it the way that I wrote it, I guess. I don't know. Jim asked a question. Then we have another question that's over here. So I'll ask the burning question first.
Ooh.
And so, by the way, everybody out there in Maple Syrup Land, we have started a burning questions response thing where if you have questions for guests or just questions in general, like we'll ask them to anybody. It doesn't have to be specific to the guests that we're talking to. But there is a Google form where you can leave like a voice message, a video message, whatever you want, a written message, and we'll ask it on air. So Michael Schmay from www.iwritegames, he is an editor and he has written and edited more than 100 projects, all the way down from one-sheet pamphlets to the entirety of Cthulhu Wars. And he asks, what are your biggest challenges in rules writing from the design side, and what should your editors know? What do you
Mm.
want your editors to know?
So different people have different perspectives and approaches. I think, and I like for everyone who is working on a game to have played the game. It's not a
Mm.
hard requirement, and I can easily see folks who feel like that's actually a negative and not something you should do. But I find that whether it's the artist or the graphic designer or the editor, having uh, experienced and touched and understood the product informs that work. Um, again, it could certainly be the case that then they're susceptible for then making the same mistakes the creator might make and missing something. So I think there are cases to say no, it's beneficial for it to be blind on blind. Like I guess the other thing I would say I would love from editors is they're different editors at different skill sets at different ranges, but having the context as an editor to know when you're editing grammar and when you're changing rules is like monumental. And and taking the time to check on a process, I mean, not so much, but like it is really easy. I've seen countless cases where somebody changed a sentence structure, passive to active, maybe, or reworded something, or and suddenly the rule is not the same. I know lots of
Mm.
folks who have had rule books released after where a rule was it was edited by the publisher, and the game is not the
The
sense they're
same.
not
Yeah.
the audience isn't playing the game you designed because actually the rules don't tell them how to.
Yeah.
And I think that's another thing that editors who do rule books really it's different than editing, you know,
Mm.
a book.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, good point.
I have
R
2 editors, actually. I have one who edits for, like, grammar, content, consistency, and then I have someone I get to check it for a rule, like, from a rule book perspective, so they're completely different
Yeah, and we
hats.
have cultural consultants and sensitivity readers. We have all sorts of editors on
Mm.
RPG projects.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
Rebecca, you're completely right. People
Mhm.
don't play or make games in vacuums. No matter how precise you think your rules language is, it will, capital will, be interpreted differently by someone, whether because they are different meanings or because they're distracted or because they don't have the gaming experience to see the common terms and patterns. And it's very interesting. Like one of the funniest ones that ever happened, I talk about it like I've talked about it multiple times in the last couple of weeks, is that um, we wrote a rule. Actually, it was Josh's fault, Helena. I'm just kidding. It's not Josh's fault. But it was for Belfort, for one of our oldest games. And the way we described the math made sense to Canadians and Americans, but not to British people. Is
Oh.
literally just how British people think about or talk, or about division or something. I can't remember what it was. It was just slightly different that made every British player score it slightly differently. And it's
Hmm.
like, we didn't know that. That's fascinating to me. That is interesting, right? Um,
I'll have to have a look because I learnt maths in Europe,
yeah.
so
So it might
see
have
if
been
I get
something.
something wrong completely different.
Yeah, but it was just fascinating to me that, like, culture matters even when you share a language, right? So yes, I agree. I understand that things will happen like that. Um, yeah. So, the other question that we had was from Jim Baker, which is controversial, he says, but do you think the industry will ever get to a point where rules just live online only? Jim is not saying that he wants to do this, but he's wondering what you, Edo, as an industry vet, think.
Um, I mean, look, I think there's certainly a trend both to, you know, online learning, but not necessarily even like a PDF, but like, oh, well, you can watch the video. There's not even a rule book. There's just how to play. I think you're going to see those, and there's Diz or whatever it's called. Like, there's a variety of other apps and approaches. And I think it'll be more common. I mean, it's been more common to see games that have a link like download the rules
Mhm.
online. Um, I don't ever think it will be universal because to me it's a little like asking um, why aren't all board games online? And I think that inherent to the physical media and the things that folks like about it ties to a desire for some people, not all people, to have those experiences. And so for me, I bristle to like I'm going to go play a game, and now you're telling me I have to go get my phone or my computer to play this game, where this is like actually my detachment from those things. And and then everyone starts looking at their things because one person has a phone out. Now everyone has to do it. An interesting relevant point conversation that we had was we were making this game, Herbaceous Pocket Edition, this little
Nice.
thing.
So
And I
cute.
had that conversation because it has a little reference card, but I had this thing that was like, hey, you can learn how to play. Here's the rule. And this isn't a retail product. It's not, it's only sold from our web store. It's like targeted at people who like our herbaceous and want a smaller edition. It's not the frontline product.
Right.
So the conversation was like, in that way, does it make sense or whatever? And we went back and forth, and like Keith Mateka, who I talk about a lot of things, was like, don't tell me you're about to make a game and not ship a rule book with it. Like, don't be that person. And so what we ultimately did, which I think was mixed, and I just it's not that it was a cheap product, but it wasn't meant to be like I didn't want to open it up and like rewrite a big font rule. Like it was meant to be like, hey, we're gonna make it smaller and call it a day. What we ended up doing is we printed for like whatever the 8-10 cents a rule book, which is a 1-to-1 with a rule book. And so it was like, do this or not do it at all. But it's small font. Like this isn't the font that I would like normally think is acceptable in a board game. Like it's tiny. You have to look at it. And so part of it was, but it's not illegible, but it is small. And so part of it was like, to me, this is like, I think most people are going to know how to play. We have those other options, but if you want rules and you have it and you want to refer to it, it's there. They're small, but it's not, because to make it full size, I would have had to do it like 20 pages and like do some fold out thing.
It'd be like a
And
map.
so, but, and I'm happy with the decision. I think it was the right call. I know that like there've been reviews and folks are like, this is a really small font. And it's like, yeah, it is. But anyway, so this was that decision, that conversation came up. But no, I think because of the way people play games and what it means to a lot of folks, I don't think it'll be universal. I think it'll be more common for sure.
Yeah. So Rebecca makes a good point. She always makes good points. So I like Rebecca, and I like librarian. She's a librarian, so she's doubly liked. She loves that rules are accessible online, but always wants a physical copy in the game box. She would actually like 2 physical copies because then it's easier to share, right? So I think that's a really interesting point. I wonder if we're going to see people put 2 copies in for some games.
Well, a more common realistic version of that is, and I don't mean realistic, but like there's a certain expense to including a rule book. Whether or not you have multiple references, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of games will just have one reference, and it's something that everyone has access to, and it's a little, you do this thing where you're passing it around. And so there's lots of cases where those are, I think it's more known and common now for people to be like, well, let's get a reference card for all players, not just one reference card. But you'll still find the games that only have one, for sure.
Yeah. And definitely, like, we try to make an effort to make sure that if we're making a player aid or like a player mat, it has as much information that all players need on every single mat. So yeah, there's a lot that you can do to make all that stuff really helpful for everybody. Hey, you know what? We've kept you really late. It is, well, it's really late for me. So that's all I'm saying. It's time for Sen to go to bed. But hey, if you'd like to reach me, you can reach me at Senfeng Lim on Twitter. Kat, where can people find you?
At Drarink on all the things.
On all the things, and Meeple Syrup on Twitter as well. Edo, if people want to talk to you more about rules and pencil first games, where can they find you?
Probably the quickest way is you can at me, bro. You can at Baraf on Twitter. But also, Facebook is reasonable, as well as, from Gaming with Edo channel. I mean, a lot of these topics, I've hit in more depth with a lot of the folks who are smart and capable. Like and not this format, but like this type of chat happens. And so, that's a great place to learn stuff and comment on the video or just reach out to me. I'm not always immediately responsive, but I do get back to folks as I can.
There you go. And you can also find the catalog of wonderful games at Pencil First And
On a beautiful website. I just have to say, the
it
website
is a
is
lovely website.
fantastic. People are really good.
Pencilfirstgames.com is what we're talking about. There you go. If you'd like to support what we're doing here and keep the lights on, you can sign up for patreon.com/maple syrup. And Edo, do you have any final advice for everybody?
Final advice. I think I would just life advice, right? It's all about the journey and not the and not the destination, right? And I think trying to when you make games, you release product, you're gonna it's gonna sell, it isn't gonna sell, people are gonna like it, people might not like it, right? And if your value proposition isn't just driven by the result, but drive by the experience, the growth, the friendships, the people you work with, all those things along the way, like actually in time and effort, it totally outscales whatever that little thing is. And so, the more you can adopt that when making entertainment and creative media and art, is like I think super valuable. That would be my
Yeah,
recommendation.
that's a great recommendation. All right, so let's see what's coming soon. Coming soon. Next week, we have the host panel, which is myself and Kat. And who else is joining us, Kat?
We've got, I'm really terrible at remembering names off the cuff. We have Jay Bell and we have Vitessa Elise and our special guest, Isaac. We're going to be talking about homework games, which is games that we think that board game designers should study in order to become better board game designers.
And we'll probably put some pencil first games in there to study rules design,
Yeah.
apparently. There you go. And just so people know, Jay Bell and Vertessa are always going to be on our host panels for this year. They are common hosts with us for the panels, and then we'll have one special guest that rotates through. And this time it's Isaac. On February 15th, we have Kate Bullock. What is Kate talking to us about, Kat?
She's going to be talking to us about safety and calibration. So, how to make your game safe for people to play so that you don't accidentally trigger traumas, so that you are basically a considerate designer.
Yeah, and this is specifically important for RPGs, but can also be applied to board games as well. Hey, Sarah Ship, who's in the chat, will be here on February 22nd. What is she going to be talking to us about?
Well, Sarah, you're going to be talking to us about how to start a thematic design.
I hope you
And
knew that.
Yeah. Oh, that's the title, word for word, I believe. I wouldn't interfere with Sarah's words.
There you go. And on March 1st, Matt Holden is coming in, and Matt is going to talk to us about IGA and the improvement of the tabletop environment. I don't know what that is all about, but that sounds great. So IGA is the association of indie game designers, indie game publishers, indie gamers that Matt runs, which is sort of this clearinghouse of stuffs. He'll tell you more about it. So come here on March 1st, or you can go to the website right now and find out more about what Matt does to help new publishers get off the ground. It's wonderful stuff. All right. I think that's it. All right. I am going to say goodbye from Canada. And Edo, you can say goodbye from California. And Kat, you're in
Goodbye
Portland,
from
Oregon.
California.
Yes. Goodbye from Ontario. We'll see y'all later. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.